Thanks very much to Nuffield for the invitation to speak today. This was literally half a lifetime ago for me when I commenced my Nuffield journey. And Brendan Smart and Terry Hare were part of that journey for me. I think pretty much everyone else seems to have come afterwards, just making me feel a little bit old. Look, I'm really honoured to be here and both with the current scholars and the new scholars, watching them start their new journey. Back in 1996 when I was interviewed ahead of my 1997 journey, it was quite different to what we do here today. Your interviews were on one day at the Melbourne Showgrounds and then we rolled up for the presentation lunch the next day. So most of us were without spouses. It was a much smaller group. And it was also quite surreal when you then got your scholarship because you found out right then and there. And I remember walking outside of the building literally to the phone booth on the sidewalk and ringing my boss and my husband or fiancé at the time, going, I've got one. You know, it was not like it is now where you get a phone call, you can share it with your partner. So yeah, very, very different. The 1997 cohort was a group of 5, which was the biggest Nuffield cohort at the time, an increase from the traditional 2 to 3. So that was a bit of a change. And like this year, we were a female dominant cohort with 3 female scholars and a couple of lovely fellas. I was the grand age of 25, so you can do the maths. And I know that's, I was the youngest scholar at the time, but that's now something that's been surpassed. My scholarship was supported by Lady Marigold Southey, and it was a scholarship specifically for women, which meant for me, who didn't have a farm and sat in a corporate role, the eligibility was a little bit more flexible. So that was the beginning of what I think for me, I had no idea at the time would be a life-altering journey and continues to be. So rolling on from that lunch in September, my fiancé and I decided maybe we'd better get married before I headed off. So 12 weeks after the scholarship announcement, we had a wedding. 6 weeks after that, I left, which was much to the horror of a heap of our friends and colleagues, because at the time you left for your GFP and you did your personal study right then and there. So I pretty much left for 16 weeks as a newlywed. And just to make life living a little bit more on the edge, which I feel like my life is always living on the edge, but we both applied for new jobs and left South Australia and moved to New South Wales, which really hadn't been on the cards at the time. That all happened. That was pretty fun. We headed off for our GFP, and this was the first time Nuffield went to Asia, and we had the 5 of us, 3 Kiwis, a guy from Zim and 1 British scholar. And Mick Sheehy, some of you would know, who was based in Asia at the time, was obviously quite integral in making that happen. And as with all first-time events, there's always going to be a couple of little hiccups. So the Australian Nuffield contingent organised 1 leg in Asia and the Kiwis organised the other leg. And do you think they'd worked out how to get from point A to point B? Negative. And so there was some major holiday in Asia at the time, and there was a fair bit of work that went into figuring out how to do that on a public holiday. Back in the days of no mobile phones, no Google, it was certainly a different era. But we got there. Might have been one of the most harrowing flights of my life, but we did make it. It was pretty amazing going into Asia. I hadn't spent any time there, and for someone who works in, for arguably intensive horticulture with viticulture, didn't see a lot of that until we got up to the Cameron Highlands, and that was one of my highlights of the trip. I didn't see a grapevine at all for that 6 weeks. No great surprise there. And as per all standard Nuffield tours, a couple of dairies, they were there. The second leg of the trip was obviously into the UK and the EU, and that was pretty mind-blowing. And for someone who'd just grown up in the city and then started a career in the wine industry or in the viticulture industry, I didn't know anything about the Common Agricultural Policy, subsidies, hadn't really done any non-farm stakeholder engagement and general bigger policy. So it was pretty enlightening, and some of that stuff continues to play a role in what I do now. But I think the part that blew my mind, and a few people have touched on it today with the GFP tours, was understanding how subsidies work. People being paid to not farm, no reason to get better, no reason to innovate. It's just kind of the opposite of what we all do here. And I guess why we're all going on our Nuffield tour, it's to see that stuff So yeah, I remember sitting around the table at the Farmers Club and these blokes going, oh, I get 5 million in subsidies and I get 1.2 million, and just yeah, still blows my mind. So I went forward on my own trip after the GFP, and for anyone who's been to the Farmers Club in London, that was my de facto home and office. So I basically, this was in the days, like I said, no mobile phones, no emails. I'd written a lot of letters and sent a lot of faxes before I'd left Australia, but basically every Friday night I'd roll back into the Farmers Club, collect a flurry of faxes, send off another set of faxes and head off to Germany for 1 week, France for 1 week, Italy for 1 week. It sounds great, doesn't it? And basically roll back into the Farmers Club every Friday night pretty shattered. The Farmers Club is the very British experience with the very British etiquette for anyone who's been there. So for the ladies, probably not well enough dressed, you know, moleskins wouldn't have cut it, dress pants, skirts. Developed a relationship with my friend Laura Ashley at that time. But I did sneak down to the telly room at the Farmers Club and slum it in jeans on the weekends because I really just needed that bit of downtime. The second leg of my personal tour took me to North America, and I spent some time in California, the East Coast up in New York State and into Canada. And I think for me, being in a new world wine country where the rules are quite different compared to Europe was probably where I really saw the gems of my tour. But what was interesting for me was, like I said, I don't own a vineyard or I don't own a farm, is coming home and seeing all that cool stuff and putting it into play was really difficult. My scholarship was not sponsored by my industry RDC, so there wasn't that capacity to extend that out to anyone else or to try and get that traction. But what I really love is it's a very long, slow burn, is a lot of that's now coming to the fore in our industry, and I'll talk a little bit later on, but they're things we're putting into my husband's family business where I kind of have control of some vineyards that I don't own. So after my GFP, I returned to the Hunter, smashed out my report for Nuffield and one for my employer that was a little bit bigger because they generously provided me with paid leave, which is pretty unusual, and I'm very, very fortunate to have that. But look, many seeds were sown in that trip. It just took a long time to make it happen. This really was the beginning of the journey for me about realising that my place in the world of agriculture in Australia was really tiny. And I think had I not left or had that experience, I would have probably just hummed along, whereas I really realised we were quite small cogs, but there was a lot more out there to do. I did own a vineyard for a little while. A couple of years after I got back from my tour, my husband and I, in partnership with my parents, bought a vineyard in the Hilltops region at Young, and we ran that vineyard remotely from the Hunter. Every other weekend was pretty much spent down there, and that was a great time. It was a really good learning experience of spending my own money, understanding the consequences of my own decisions, because that hurt financially if I didn't get it right. And we ticked along doing that. We started a family. And funnily enough, when you have a 1.5-year-old and you start talking about moving 5-6 hours away, your in-laws come to the party pretty quick. So my husband was offered a job in their business, which is an integrated wine business in the Hunter. We sold that and we've been in the Hunter ever since. So the noughties for me were pretty much a period of family and starting a small business with consulting. I think about 6 months after my son was born, my husband saw me go stir crazy and he's like, you need to go and do some stuff. So that started off, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days a week. And then my second child did her first vineyard visit, I think at 6 weeks, because you don't get maternity leave when you work for yourself. It's just how it is. So I had very little engagement with Nuffield, and someone touched on that earlier today. I think for me it was all a little bit too hard, but I'm extremely grateful to Jim Gelch reaching out probably around 2009 and reconnecting me, because I'm here with all you lovely people. So that was pretty good. So what do I do now? Day to day, I'm based in the Hunter. My consulting business is really, or has been, particularly for the last 20 years, on strategic and operational viticultural consultancy, initially in the Hunter, and it's grown across New South Wales. My husband's family business is a client, and we've always kind of kept it relatively formal like that. But that relationship's kind of evolving as their business continues to grow and this next generation is moving into the business increasingly. So that's kind of like the paid work. I'm quite active in industry, both at a local, state and national level. I've just come off the New South Wales Wine Industry Association as chair of R&D. That was a great 6 years. We drove some really big initiatives and engagement with all the different R&D and funding providers for our industry. And I'll talk about a few other highlight projects out of that. I'm fortunate to sit on the Australian Wine Research Institute board in Adelaide, and that's exciting because it keeps me engaged with what's happening in a much bigger scale. And I have a couple of fellow Nuffields that have been on and off that board with me. Toby Beckers is one. And, you know, there's biosecurity committees and all that other stuff. COVID, I had a COVID project and did my certificate 4 in training and assessment. And as a follow-on from that, I've recently joined Tokyo College as a contract trainer, delivering programs for the wine industry. And that's really exciting, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. I'm pretty motivated to drive practice change in my industry, biosecurity preparedness, and advocate for my industry. Like, we need to drive things to go forward and to be better, or to be solid and better. And I've got a few irons in the fire at the moment, which if they come to fruition, I'll probably try and pull back on my strategic consulting and shift into a couple of other areas. This is one of the key, I guess, R&D adoption things I've done on the ground. I'm a bit of a doer. I'm kind of solutions orientated. There's no point having a whinge. You just got to get in there and get stuff done. Sunburn and climate change is obviously an issue for us in the wine industry, so I've helped run some demo projects. This was one that was pretty visible when you start spraying vineyards with white clay and they literally look like you've snowed on them. Kind of hopped in and did this with a couple of locals and got that rolling. We've seen this as a massive tool for us to help manage. Initially we thought just sunburn, but ripening efficiency, canopy efficiency, and also to help manage harvest compression. We can spread vintage out by using tools like this. And that's now used much more widely in industry. And I have to admit, Twitter, because that was the social media thing in 2014 rather than some of the other tools, this was amazing. The year we did this on a big scale and we started tweeting it, and we could see later regions, people engaging and adopting it. So that was pretty cool. And I have a child in New Zealand at the moment who had to do a project, and he texted me a picture of my fact sheet that I wrote, and he said, "Oh, look what I just found, Mum. Didn't know you did that." So, yeah, it's kind of nice that it's still current and floating the boat of the younger people in the family. Biosecurity is a project or an area I'm kind of getting more and more involved in. Our industry with New South Wales Wine and DPI, we ran prior to COVID a really significant 2-day simulation on an incursion during harvest of a biosecurity pest. That was pretty mind-blowing for most of us, and we really realised our preparedness was lacking. So there's stuff kind of ticking along in the background, but Varroa mite has really made us realise how underprepared we are, and I think there's a fair bit of focus to come. So I'll be dabbling a bit more in that space over the next year or two. Fungicide resistance and agrochemical use, as per my study topic, continues to be something I do a lot in that space, and work on industry reference group, and was recently part of the CRC safe bid for Wine Australia to get that up and running, which we did. So we'll see a lot more work continue there, which is great. I began consulting across New South Wales probably 6 or 7 years ago now, when I got both kids kind of at the back end of high school and off to uni. They had a bit more freedom to be away from home. So yeah, I get around to Murray Bateman, Hilltops, Tumbarumba, Orange, and a little bit to Mudgee. And that's great. That's been really terrific professionally, dealing with a different type of grower. In the Hunter, I have a lot of absentee landowners, whereas I'm dealing with really grassroots growers out in the other regions. You know, problem shared is a problem solved, and there's a lot of learnings both ways. I actually have taken things from these regions back to what we do in the Hunter, so that's a bit of fun. Scenery's pretty good, wine's not bad, can't complain. Just, I guess, moving on to a couple of other highlights or lowlights. Vintage 2020 was pretty tough for the New South Wales wine industry. There were some horrific physical losses in Tumbarumba and a couple of other areas, but the whole of the industry was touched by the impact of smoke. Grapevines metabolise smoke, so you can literally look at a crop and it is absolutely perfect. And then you take that fruit, you ferment it, and you taste it 5 days after you've picked it, and it is like licking an ashtray. So there's a big decision to make. Do you pick it? Do you not? Because you don't really know. So I was involved in effectively what was an emergency response for industry. This started on about the 20th of December, so right through the Christmas and New Year period, coordinating picking super perishable fruit, getting it through all the biosecurity protocols, getting stuff to Adelaide en masse, and we were doing this about every third day to get results, to get it back to make decisions to pick. It was massive. We learned a lot. The body of science was really incomplete and remains so, but we know a lot more from all of that work that happened. So, yeah, kind of a low light, but yeah, we're way better prepared for the next one. So, yeah, not much fun, but lots of outcomes. Back in the Hunter, I work pretty closely with my husband Jeremy. He's a viticulturist, but obviously within his business, I think wears about 20 hats: winemaker, GM, IT guy, all of that stuff. But we've got a bit more time and headspace now to be driving practice change and sustainability goals within their business. And we're trying pretty hard to lead by example, you know, and have people looking over the fence at us. So that's been a bit challenging with droughts, flooding rains. It takes time in a perennial crop. You can't just change what you do on the hop. You've got to work through all that weather. And the pandemic and financial uncertainty obviously had some impacts. But people kept drinking through the pandemic, which was great for business. And I've never been more appreciative of a career in ag when you're an essential worker and you can keep going out when everyone else can't. So, yeah, very happy about that. I guess for Jeremy and I, what's underpinning what we're doing is creating resilience. It's creating resilience in our vineyards in the drought periods and in the wet periods. And our real focus at the moment is on the vineyard floor and future-proofing with our plants. So, you know, we go out there and plant clonal and rootstock trials, which are going to take 10 or 15 years to come to fruition. We're really, really interested in the new disease-resistant varieties that are being bred domestically and internationally, and they're kind of going under the radar. Some of them are being conventionally bred, but you know there is some really big opportunities with GM, and it is my opinion that the wine industry needs to revisit their 25-year-old position statement that GM is not for us. That time has come, and that will upset a few people, but we won't be able to lift the sustainability bar if we don't make that change. Stuck in a little bit of travel in 2019 to South America, not knowing obviously the pandemic was around the corner. And that was really cool. There was really big growth in South America about the same time the Australian wine industry had a big growth phase. So it was interesting to see how they're grappling with many of the same challenges. And we're going to resume some travel early next year after harvest and get to Europe to see those disease-resistant vines. So the journey keeps coming. It's not over. 2021 was a pretty big milestone year on a whole lot of levels. We had an 18th, a 21st, 250th, a 25th wedding anniversary, and I celebrated 21 years of being in business without killing anyone, so that was pretty good. I jagged my first international consulting gig in Central Otago in that very brief window that the border was open. That came about through a client in the Hunter, and that was terrific, and I'd really like to have a bit more of a crack at that. But the highlight of last year was very unexpectedly being awarded the Graham Gregory Award by New South Wales DPI for services to the New South Wales wine industry. Completely out of the blue, but I was extremely thrilled to also be the first woman to receive that honour, and that's been around for, 20 odd years, that award. So that's up there with my Nuffield as a really big achievement. But I couldn't have done it without the rest of the family. I shouldn't fail to mention them. So looking forward, the new challenge for me, definitely I think Tocal is going to become a much bigger part of my life. I'm loving the training and developing of material for industry, but also the people I'm meeting and starting to mentor some of those younger entrants to industry. So yes, that's going to keep me busy and flinging around New South Wales. I've got a couple of side gigs. I'm part of a group that's helped create a virtual community on Instagram called Viticulturist Australia. We're really working hard to lift the profile for viticulturists and create networks for people who work in quite isolated roles. We've just cracked 4,000 followers in 2 years, so we're pretty happy with that. And we actually got to meet physically at the recent Wine Industry Technical Conference, where we had a number of scholars meeting and presenting. And Richard Least, Richard Heath presented, and Nikki Mann was there, but she was such a dynamo, she didn't make the photo. She was off to something else. We've just started a local land care group, so that's something really new and exciting and a little bit different to going to work. It's, I guess, it's a feel-good project which is bringing our community together as well. My current challenge is literally the outcomes of the floods. That's made vineyards unpassable. The mountains are still draining. Every time we get half an inch, we're back to where we were. So my never say never moment was hearing about choppers early in my career and going, oh, why would you do that? It's just such poor coverage. Anyway, up she went last week. We jumped through a lot of regulatory and logistical hurdles, but stakeholder engagement has been our real challenge. We have celladors, we have accommodation, we have people with horses, alpacas, all of that palaver. So that was about 6 weeks in the making to get that up. Everything mixed, everything worked. So I think I'll have another one up later in the week. So yeah, never say never and just keep on keeping on, I think. So I'm buckling up for my 32nd season, you know, which is looking challenging, but it's glass half full and we'll just keep plugging away. I'm nearly at the end, folks. On the home front, my gang have grown up. I've got one child off in New Zealand for 12 to 18 months doing a vineyard internship, so we're loving that he's flirting with a career in the agriculture end of the wine industry, not the making end. It's a great excuse to get over to Otago and drink a bit more Pinot. It's all good. Youngest is at uni and she occasionally graces us with her presence around her busy life down there. Jeremy and I spend a lot of time together in vineyards. We kind of have a hot date once a week where we visit all of his vineyards, and it's been really nice to share the spoils with him together this year, with him getting up to some gongs as well. So I guess just to wrap up, like everyone else, I can't really articulate how amazing Nuffield has been and the influence on my life, but I know it wouldn't be as rich and rewarding had I not had that scholarship awarded back in 1996. It's been mentioned a fair bit, but this paying it forward and contributing to Nuffield, to your community, it's just so important because, again, everything you give comes back in spades. And that's what Nuffield does. It also gets you out of your comfort zone. It makes you grow. So for those of you at the beginning of your Nuffield journey, take it all in, suck it up, go down the roads less travelled, see where they lead. And just to close, and I was kind of pleased Fiona mentioned this word last night, my favourite Nuffield word, I don't know if anyone else has got a favourite Nuffield word, but I do. And someone mentioned this, I think, back at the 2018 or 2019 conference, is agile. You know, I use this word a lot with people, is you've got to be agile. And I think the pandemic, you know, has just heightened that so much, is you've got to have plan A, plan B, plan C. You've got to think about everything and be agile in your business, your thinking, where you're going. So go away, people, be agile.